Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
All across the fantasy universe, welcome to the Fantasy Football Hustle, powered by Pro Football Focus. I am your host, Brian Drake of FightingChanceFantasy.com, and I'm joined, of course, every single week for the past 5 years by my main man. It's PFF Senior Fantasy Analyst, Dwain McFarland. Dwain, what's going on? What are you drinking over there, my friend?
Just Dos Equis. It's a nice summer beer, Drake. Heading into summer, kind of gets the vibe going. Ian and I actually over at PFF, we did a draft today on Underdog. We just did, $5 12 team, because they don't really have anything big going. But it was fun, and it was kind of our first one to really do together. So we were working through tiers and all these sort of things. But I think it was, always good to get that first draft with someone else under your belt, because it's good. You start contrasting your takes on players versus their takes and strategy, all that kind of stuff. We'll jump into a lot of that tonight. So yeah, we were doing, we did that, and we had kind of agreed hey, we're going to have a draft and we're going to drink a draft. And so I've had 2 more drafts since then, and now I'm on 4 with you. So, if you like Buzz Dwain, you're in luck.
That's going to be your new TikTok. It's at Buzz Dwain.
Buzz Dwain. I opened a TikTok. I've not posted anything. It's kind of frightening, to be honest. I look at it, I'm like, what the hell's going on? As soon as I open the app up, just everything starts playing. I'm like, why is
That's the worst?
It's just coming at me.
Yes.
I'm like, calm down, TikTok.
They need a landing page for TikTok because I said the same thing. Plus, Dwayne, we're old. We're old guys. We're in our mid-40s.
And I want to take advantage of tech, but it's I'm trying to get there. Austin Gail, my main man, he was on Good Morning Football this morning with Kyle Brandt and all those folks. You guys got to check it out. Austin's awesome. Was just draining 3-pointers all over the place, which we all expect him to do. But he's really been come on, man, you got to get on TikTok. That's where it's all at. And I'm like, man, I'm old. I don't know. It's and now I pop it open and I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? Where do I go? It's so different. And look, I get it. TikTok is way bigger than Twitter. It's not close. So I'm going to work on it.
All right. What's your name on there?
It's just at Dwain_McFarland. And I've posted nothing. I'm following 10 people, mostly PFF, guys. And so we'll see what happens with it. But I put it in my stretch goals that I turned in. Hey, I'll do something. I didn't commit to a lot, but I'm I'm going to do something on TikTok. We'll see how it goes. I put some other goals that I thought were pretty aggressive on that one. I was kind of a low bar of commitment. I'm going to get on there. We'll see how it goes, and we'll take it from there.
The show has a TikTok at FF Hustle, and I started one myself this week at Hate the Drake. H8.
You started one too in the same week as me, and we didn't even talk about this.
I know we didn't. And you know what it is? I went on there and I searched fantasy football stuff, and I followed my guy Andrew Erickson, who I did, former PFF guy, did my Sirius show with. He's really good at it. And then I started looking around the fantasy space, and I realized nobody else is good at it. It's a bunch of 12-year-olds, and all they do is they take content and things you already know. They just put some music behind it, and they get a bazillion views. It'll be did you know who won the Super Bowl this year? And then there's a bunch of highlights or whatever. And then, they show a guy holding the Lombardi trophy. And
I've really got people like it. I'm sure there are some people that are way, it's beyond what you were just saying, but that's kind of what I've seen too. There's no knock against the folks that have figured it out. You figured it out. My question becomes can I be my authentic self and be successful at TikTok? If that works, then fine, I'll be good on TikTok. But if I've got to be something besides me, I probably, if people don't what I've got to bring in that authentic way, it's I'm past that point in my life of trying to I'm going to adapt just to get followers. So we'll see. I do think it's a cool platform that probably has things that I don't know yet. Mm-hmm. So I'm working on it. Anyway, we didn't even talk about this. We're just going in a total, we're down a rabbit hole.
If anyone wants to be our social media intern.
If anyone wants to do my TikTok videos for me.
Who, your daughter?
Oh, Zoe could do them. Yeah, for sure. Zoe loves TikTok. My wife watches TikTok all the time. Like there's a monkey she follows on there. Seriously.
Does the monkey
and
want
they
to
are
do
funny.
our
The
social
monkey's
media?
funny. The monkey is way better than any content you're going to get from me on TikTok. Like hands down, it will never be close.
That's awesome. And yeah, if anybody out there wants to help us with TikTok or whatever else, please slide into the DMs and on Twitter at Drake Fantasy. He's at Dwain McFarland. The show is, of course, at FF Hustle. And right now, best ball drafts are what's hot in the fantasy streets these days, especially at places like Underdog and the FFPC, which, Dwain, rumor has it, contracts may be signed sooner or later. You may be seeing a lot more of the hustle promoting some best ball content and doing drafts. So stay close for an announcement on that any day now. But today, what we want to examine is the early ADP, thanks to our great friend, Darren Armani, over at fantasymojo.com. And we're going to look at players that Dwain has noted as targets, fades, and a new term that's going to need a lot of explaining, straddle.
I knew it as me. It's like, what's funny is like straddle like immediately jumps into my mind like from a poker standpoint, but it really has nothing to do with like what I'm defining as straddle here. So straddle in poker is you're sitting in the big blind and you decide to go ahead and put money down blindly. And if you're playing at a 2-5 table, you're going to put $10 down before any cards are dealt. And you're going to say, I'm straddling. And basically that just gives you last action once the cards are dealt. So it's kind of what I'm trying to do with straddle here, but not so much. Really what I'm saying on these players is really more of a players you want to hedge on. Mm-hmm. So we'll get into it more. But essentially it's like guys that I know that once the draft happens, I don't know what way they're going to go, Drake, but they're going to go up or down. So I want some exposure to them, but I don't want to be overexposed. So that's really what the straddle means. Not necessarily the best poker analogy. And I wasn't even honestly thinking of it as an analogy, but the term did come into my head from poker, but there was a disconnect. Anyway,
well, speaking of poker,
think of hedge. Hedging is better. Hedge is something people will understand.
Well, if you guys are into poker, I know Dwain is. I'm not. I don't know anything about poker. Dwain has already signed up, and he will be competing in the first annual Fantasy Football Expo poker tournament to be held at the Fantasy Football Expo in Canton, Ohio. There are seats available. Our good buddy Drew Davenport is going to run that event. It will take place on August the 12th. I believe that's the first day. August 12th through the 14th in Canton, Ohio is the Fantasy Football Expo. The hustle will be there, and Dwain is going to be in a poker tournament. If you want to play against him, go see Drew Davenport on Twitter and sign up there or at the Fantasy Football Expo. Our good buddy Bob Lung, who runs that. Are you excited to play some poker?
Oh man, absolutely. I'm definitely rusty. Since I've been like headlong into the full-time fantasy role, even though I technically could probably have more time because I've got a schedule that I can, work around certain things. Like I haven't played. Like I've been so like focused on trying to be the best I can be at this. You know how it is like when you're coming into a new role, even though it's been something you've always done. Like I'm still like, technically I'm still like kind of in that phase, I guess. And so, but yeah, man, I love poker. I love every part about it. The strategy is like the biggest part, which is kind of, an easy transition, like what we're talking about tonight, which is really kind of taking a zoom out strategy look at some of these things and how you think about roster construction. But there seem to be some of our best shows that people really appreciate. But yeah, man, I'm super excited. I'm so excited that Drew is leading this up. And Football Guys is, they've gotten behind it and they're helping sponsor it. And so, yeah, if you're going to be at the expo and you're looking to play some poker, like I'll be out there and I'll probably still be rusty at that point, but I may still be good enough to beat you. So we'll see.
Anybody could beat me. That's why I'm playing in the fantasy football game against a bunch of other fantasy.
You're going to have a pulled quad. I'll just have a bruised ego. So
I can still run. I played basketball last night.
Drake's throwing down the gauntlet. He can still run. You guys all heard it.
So, I mean, I'm a scrawny guy. That's why I play wide receiver. But my 41-year-old ass will still run past you. So, yeah, go see our buddy at Drew Davenport FF and sign up for the poker tournament and, take Dwain's money or whatever it is. So, let's get back to the fantasy football here. And so, not only is Dwain breaking down ADP in his latest tier articles over at PFF.com, but you can find his wide receiver tiers and tight end tiers all available at PFF.com. And if you're like me, you're itching to get that content early because you want to get your edge over your league mates who are all making poor Masters bets right now this week. head over to pff.com, use promo code HUSTLE. It's going to save you 25% off any subscription. It's going to gain you access to the NFL Draft Guide, which is awesome, player grades, premium NFL and college stats, plus the fantasy content that sets the industry standard from guys like our own Dwain McFarland, Ian Hartitz, Nathan Yonke, and much, much more. Use promo code HUSTLE today. Save 25%. And here's a tip. Bet Tiger to miss the cut. You'll thank me later. What do you think of Tiger back in the Masters, by the way?
Don't care.
It's like you're talking poker.
Like, look, I mean, I do like, look, I grew up like with, Tiger, like he was young when I was young. And like now he's getting older and he's kind of like as I'm getting older. So there's definitely like a connection between me and Tiger. And I do like golf. I've gotten away from it. I used to play it a lot, but you know how it goes, Drake. You get to where it's like, okay, I know I got a 4 to 5 hour commitment. I've got kids. I've got a wife. I got a full-time job. And then you're trying to do anything with fantasy on the side. Back in the day, like golf was just the thing that had to go. So maybe eventually I'll get back into it, but it's not something that necessarily gets me excited. I'm in several threads, DM threads like on Twitter where people are going nuts about the Masters, and like they're all into it, like all the overs and unders and all the player props and the DFS angles and like super sharp guys. I should probably like just read their stuff and like put in a lineup. But I'm for whatever reason at this phase of my life not interested, like at all. Don't care.
My God, I have a putting green behind me here, down here in the studio. I play way too much golf. I'm like Tiger also, he hits it a long way. I hit it a long way the wrong way. So if you want to play from 2 fairways over, I'm your man. I can be your caddy for that. So back to the show here. Let's start things at the running back position.
So just to recap really quick, you're fast and long.
That's what I pay the ladies to tell me.
Okay, we got it.
Let's start at the running back position, where this has become, Dwain, a really interesting conversation, and it surrounds the so-called dead zone. And there's a few running backs you wrote about as targeting who are in this dead zone. And as many of you know, fantasy drafters often find themselves in this quote-unquote space where it's rounds 4 to 6, and let's say you're not exactly excited about one of these guys, and you should be taking a likely better option at wide receiver or tight end, but you feel obligated to take a running back. And then, that's where your draft all goes downhill. But that's why you're listening to The Hustle, because we like talking about draft strategy and how to build a winning roster. But this year, Dwain, according to ADP, Leonard Fournette is living in that dead zone with an ADP of 4.1 over in the FFPC. Now, last year, Lenny finished as PPR running back 5 in only 14 games while averaging 18.3 points per week. The Bucs have Brady back. We know they're going to be in scoring position a ton. Our main man, Rojo, he's gone, but Gio Bernard's back. Now, Fournette is the first name listed in the running back column in your article over at pff.com. Getting a top 5 potential running back in the 4th round seems like stealing to me. Like, what's wrong with this picture here? Like, why is this happening?
Well, I think one is because it's interesting why it's happening. One, I think it's because actually the draft community is more educated. But what I start to wonder is like if the pendulum has swung too far, the wrong way. So with Fournette, like if 5 years ago, Fournette would already probably be a 2nd round pick, right? He'd probably be a mid-second. People will be thinking Bucs, great offense. Who else is there to challenge him? Oh, they re-signed Gio Bernard. Who cares? He wiped the slate clean with Gio Bernard last year, even when Gio was healthy. Like Leonard Fournette just gave him the stiff arm. Keyshawn Vaughn has done nothing. The Bucs don't have like all these extra picks, so are they really going to spend an early round pick? Even though Mel Kiper, recently mocked Reece Hall to the Buccaneers, like that's kind of the thing. That would sink your battleship. Like if Reece Hall or Kenneth Walker were drafted to the Buccaneers. A player we'll talk about in a minute with James Conner's kind of in a similar thing, with the Cardinals. Like those are the only things you got to avoid, right? You just got to avoid like those, them taking, one of those backs in the late 1st or even like the 2nd round. 3rd round would also be bad, but 2nd round was really what we want to avoid. Otherwise, most of the backs this year, like I think there are enough questions that you would still feel fine about Fournette. But back to kind of like my original point, like drafters know that like buying into, older running backs, just hoping that they're going to have a big role, even though they haven't been hyper efficient. Like, it's just been problematic. But the difference for me with Fournette is really the fact that the underlying, data and metrics for him, he's not a real explosive back. It's pretty good yards after contact. But the big thing for me, Drake, is really the fact that, his targets per route run every single year of his career for 5 years has been over 20%. Like, if I give you the list of other backs that have done that, they are all receiving backs besides DeMarco Murray. DeMarco Murray is the one other guy kind of similar to Fournette. The other thing with Fournette is his ADOT, or average depth of target, has been over 0. So it's been between 0 and 1, right around there over the last couple of years, which is typically means that a player is someone they're trying to work downfield. They're trying to get, you don't want a running back that's just has a negative 1.5 ADOT. They're just catching check down passes. And so anytime the offense improves or adds weapons, guess what? Their targets go away. But when you talk about a player that can actually be more of a mismatch, work downfield, do some different things, and Fournette is not at the Eckler level. He's not at a Kamara level, but he's also not, Joe Mixon, and which Joe Mixon is not Joe Mixon could probably do more than he does, like we saw in college. But right now, where Joe Mixon is, and right now, where even how, the Colts use Jonathan Taylor, there's a lot of backs in the league that are more of like, okay, this, and this aren't open. We're going to check it down. Unless they give them a screenplay. Screenplay is really the main way that they bake them into their offense with intentional looks. But Fournette gets a lot of those. And Brady, we know, likes to go to the backs. And so 5 years of consistency in that realm, like, tells me, like, this guy has a PPR floor. Like, he can be a receiving back. I probably have not given him enough credit for that in the past. And so that's kind of on me. And yeah, he's going to be 27 years old this season, but he is a former first-round pick. He's not anywhere near like the 1,500 touch or 1,500 carry threshold that we start to get concerned about with players like Zeke and Derrick Henry. And he plays on the Buccaneers. Like, he plays in probably what would be a top 5 offense. And here's the last thing on him. Even in the games, so he had, I think it was 5 games, Drake, where he had at least 80% of the snaps. So he was a true every down bell cow back. And he destroyed it in those games, top 5 kind of back. And so we know that's where his upside is. But even in the games where Gio was still a factor, and he was more in that 50 to 65% snap range and giving up some passing downs to Gio, he was still very effective. Like, he had 7 top 24 finishes in 10 games in that range. So the way I look at it is, if you can get Leonard Fournette at the beginning of the 4th round, into the 3rd round, like, he's not really at huge risk of breaking down yet. He shouldn't really be in the dead zone. Like, he is a back that really fits into a situation that looks great. And yeah, I get it. When we try to project roles, we know all kinds of shit can break loose, and we don't know. But looking at this backfield, unless they add Reece Hall, like, I really feel like Leonard Fournette is the number 1. And even if they add someone, or if Gio somehow claims more of a role this year, which some people will say, we've already seen kind of what his floor is. If he's a 60% back, like, he can still be like a top 15 back, top 17 back, even in that scenario, and you're getting him in the 4th round. So I feel like that's his floor, but his upside is so huge. Like, he's one of like 5 or 6 guys to average 18 points per game played. And if you look at the games where he truly did get the bell cow role, which is in his range of outcomes, like, man, he could have finished as the RB1 in the entire league. Look, I don't think that's going to happen. He's not as explosive as Derrick Henry. He's not as good of a receiving back as Christian McCaffrey. Like, he doesn't get you excited in like some of those attribute ways like some of these other guys do. But overall, like, it's just a really good situation.
He missed the final 3 weeks of the season when he got injured. He still had 11 games with 5 or more targets, which includes early in the season when they had, a multitude of other backs. So really great opportunity if you can get Leonard Fournette.
I think if you're drafting today, if you're drafting tonight, tomorrow, whatever, this weekend, in this article that I put up at PFF, that's really what it's about. Like, you and I have been doing this long enough, and you know this, like, their ADP has seasons. Like, people peak, people valley out. Like, some people are on a rocket ship. Some people are on, a freaking, freight train, like, straight into the coal mines. Like, you don't know where they're going. Like, they're just, ADP is going to continue to drop. If you look at a player like Fournette, like, all he has to avoid is that 2nd round pick. And that's pretty unlikely, in my opinion. You got 32 teams that could pull the trigger on a guy like Reece Hall or Kenneth Walker. Like, Isaiah Spiller, kind of like, okay, if it's an early enough pick, like, you might worry about it a little bit. But let's say they added like even Rachaad White, which I like. But is there a guarantee Rachaad White's going to get on the field as a rookie on passing downs with Tom Brady?
Not a chance.
Like it can happen, but I mean, we really going to just assume that's going to happen? So I feel like Fournette, it's also about this class. It's not a great running back class. So I feel like it's kind of like we're sitting here playing Battleship. Like there's just less chances for you to sink my battleship. If Fournette like is my, what would it be, like the aircraft carrier, Drake, where you got to like nail 5 of them. Like that's kind of how I feel about Fournette, this year with where he's at. Next year will be a different story. But right now for 2022, like Fournette, you should bake him into your strategy. You should be planning on when he's there in the 4th round, late in the 3rd round. If you're drafting now, draft him, because he won't be at that ADP most likely by the time your draft. If you're going to keep drafting and you're going to be drafting in August, September, like he could move into the 2nd round. At a minimum, he'll be an early 3rd round pick. So you want to maximize your ability to get as much exposure to him as you can, because there are negatives against Fournette. It's just right now the ADP is so good. Now's the time to grab him, and you can build your drafts around these guys.
Part of the thing that changes ADP also is just news. And if there's no news around a team or a player, then their ADP doesn't move. So another dead zone resident that makes 0 sense to me is Cardinals back James Conner. Now, it's likely that Arizona adds a back in the draft, but they also gave Conner a new deal for this year, so it's safe to assume he's going to be the man. Now, remember last year, Chase Edmonds was hurt, and then Conner went bananas before ultimately doing what James Conner does, which is getting hurt himself.
Last game, he made it to the last game.
He had double-digit performances in 9 of 14 weeks, including 35-point week where he scored 3 touchdowns. So, Dwain, we're talking about a guy who scored 18 total touchdowns last year going in round 5. That's highway robbery.
Yeah, I mean, he's very similar. He doesn't have, he's not a former 1st rounder like Leonard Fournette, but very similar profile. Like he's not a guy that we think is absolutely like explosive, just like this outrageous talent. But when I look at the depth chart and I look at the fact that he's already done it before, it's not like a guy like Mike Davis where like, oh my God, look at his quads and a picture on Twitter. Let's move him into the 5th round.
Right.
That's where you got to differentiate in the dead zone. Dead zone is real. This year, I'm not so sure. Right now, anyway, it could change. It'll probably change by the time we're drafting, and the dead zone will be real. But right now, like James Conner and Ian and I took him today in the 4th round. And we went wide receiver, James Conner in a FanDuel, over on Underdog. And so, like, I love that strategy of knowing that you can really go heavy on the receivers. And then you can come in and you can grab a guy like Conner and still come back and grab some upside guys, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. So you don't just have to tie your portfolio to a projected volume player. But again, Cardinals, a lot of these projected volume roles that don't pan out are a lot of times on bad teams. The Cardinals are going to be in above, at a minimum, above 500 team.
That's a great point.
But they could be an 11, 12 win team. And so I think that's something you got to think through when you're thinking about some of these dead zone, quote unquote, dead zone players. I think a lot of the guys sitting in the dead zone this year, they're not the normal dead zone player that we've seen, where really it's just all about, there's all this vacated opportunity. They haven't necessarily done it before. They've done a little something, but now we're going to give them all this credit. Like, to me, Conner and Fournette have shown enough in their career to know that, like, if you give them the opportunity, they're going to do well. Like, they're going to play well. And so it's you don't have 2 factors you're accounting for. Like last year with Mike Davis, we didn't know if Mike Davis, one, could be, we didn't even know if he was really good. Like, we'd seen small flashes. Number 2, we didn't know if he could handle a full workload. Never seen it. Number 3, he was on an offense that was very suspect. We thought, Arthur Smith, we could be excited about it. Maybe we get behind it. But at a minimum, it was a coin flip on that offense. But we were really leaning to the negative side because when you look at, win totals last year for the Falcons when they came out, they weren't necessarily positive. And so that's something to think about with the Cardinals, to think about, with the Buccaneers.
James Conner going off the board, according to FantasyMojo.com, ADP in the FFPC, running back 21, middle of the 4th round. Now, that is before, we're going to go a little off script here from your article, but we got to talk about this. Now, he is going before running backs like Ezekiel Elliott, who's running back 22, Travis Etienne, running back 23, Elijah Mitchell, next off the board at running back 24. So I want to get your thoughts quickly on Zeke, who did finish last year as RB6, averaged 15 points a week. Some people thought, hey, this guy's cooked. Now the line looks a little differently. Dallas doesn't quite have the firepower on the outside at wide receiver. What are your thoughts on Zeke this year? Because I think drafters are going to get to the 4th, 5th round. They're going to, wait a minute, what is Ezekiel Elliott doing here in the 4th, 5th round of a fantasy draft?
And he's going to be there. Like, he's there regularly. So when you look at it, like for me, number one, Zeke is already, he's way up there towards 2,000 rushing attempts. He was never a hyper explosive back. He was never a hyper make you miss type of back. And so he always had a great offensive line, played in a really good offense, several of the years that he's been in the league. And so to me, it's just like the clear indicators of decline, they've already started. And we see this, all the time. Like, we've caught these pre-leading indicators on David Johnson, other guys in the past. They're all happening for Zeke. So with him, like, to me, I would much rather have James Conner because I think he has more upside as far as an every down role. Pollard is played really good. Like, the days of Zeke being an 80% guy are over. It's in the range of outcomes for James Conner. For Zeke, there's no way it's happening unless Pollard gets hurt, like right out of the gate. So immediately that gives James Conner, a benefit, or a plus. And then when you look at Conner, he's got less touches in his career, could play on a better offense. I would grade them similarly. The Cowboys are going to take a step back. Like, they need to do something at the offensive line. They've lost players there. So that could potentially hurt Zeke. And so at the end of the day, like, their profiles are kind of similar as far as, like, not hyper explosive, great players, but really James Conner at this point is better in the passing game, has less touches on him. And right now, I probably trust the Cardinals offense slightly more, like kind of a tiebreaker kind of thing over Zeke. But I just feel like Conner probably still has another year or two left, Drake. Whereas with Zeke, like, there's too many red flags that are stacked up. Conner is like, there aren't any red flags necessarily for me yet. Like, if Conner was going in the 2nd round, yeah, I would be like, okay, let's tap the brakes. Let's pivot and let's go elsewhere. But with Conner going where he's going, I feel like, man, you can, again, like Fournette, you can build a strategy around working these guys in now. And then as their ADP increases throughout the summer, you can kind of let your foot off the gas. And because if they're at the end of the 2nd round, we don't feel the same around a 27-year-old running back that's not explosive. But in the end of the 3rd, early 4th round on good offenses, I like both players.
I mentioned Chase Edmonds, who's James Conner's old running mate in Arizona. He's also on your target list. Now he's a Miami Dolphin with Raheem Mostert joining him in the backfield, which will ultimately become a race to the IR. Edmonds missed all or parts of 6 games last season. He only cracked 15 PPR points once, and that was week 16. Now he's in another crowded backfield. We could be giving handoffs to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. We got a new play caller in Mike McDaniels. Why are you targeting Chase Edmonds?
Well, for me, number one, you follow the money. So, I mean, they paid Chase Edmonds essentially triple what they're giving to Raheem Mostert. Myles Gaskin is best served as a receiving back, even though he's not necessarily been utilized the best way, for that. When we saw Raheem Mostert sign, even Mike McDaniel himself told Mostert, like, look, you're coming in here to be, kind of that complimentary guy. Like, and again, coach speak, like, sometimes you can take it or leave it, especially at this time of year. So I get it if nobody wants to put that much weight into it. But if you follow the fact that Edmonds can be really good on passing downs, Edmonds was one of the most explosive backs in the league last year as far as carries over 10 plus yards. And most people don't know that. Like, that's one of the things, with Chase Edmonds that, like, sticks out to me is that I think Mike McDaniel may think, right, that he's really got is Elijah Mitchell, but he also has some receiving upside on top of that. Now, I don't know necessarily that Miami's going to throw the ball a ton to the backs when you have Tyreek Hill, and then you've also got Jalen Waddle, and then you've got to figure out how you're going to work Mike Gesicki in as well. Like, I think there's definitely going to be situations where it's like, okay, like, how much does Chase Edmonds play in? But from a targets per route run standpoint, all those sort of things, like, Edmonds is really – he's held up his end of the bargain pretty much every year in the league. So we know that he's capable of it. And so to me, those are the boxes he checks. He's got the most money. We don't think that it's probably going to be a committee. But the thing is, Drake, like, you can get him in the 9th round. He went in the 9th round of the draft today that Ian and I did. So, like, it's like that for a back that could probably get up to 50%. Like, I get it for the folks that like Mostert. I do think he's a good fit for the scheme. We've seen this, but I just don't. He's not going to be the lead back unless Chase Edmonds gets hurt. Like, we know he's not going to get the passing down work. We know that Edmonds has already shown that he can be explosive. So I feel like he's probably in line for 45 to 50% of the work. Maybe Mostert sees 30 to 35%, but I'm just not that afraid of Mostert. And I'm fine with Mostert where his ADP is as well. But I think he's starting to kind of get a little bit, in my opinion, too much pub, on social media. I think it's really, Chase Edmonds is the back to own, especially, man, 9th round ADP. Like, that's just too cheap.
Mostert right now, 12th round ADP. He's running back 43 in the latest FFPC drafts. That's a weird zone too. We could do a whole show around the guys in this area. Mostert, Darrell Henderson, who I like a lot. I think he's going to be criminally undervalued, even though Cam Akers will be back next year. James Robinson, Chris Carson. So that's a story for another day. So if we're starting our drafts, we've got a few rounds to really hammer away at those elite wide receivers. Now, from what Dwain just told us, there's great value in the dead zone if you find the right guys. Something you also might want to do, though, is get your hands on some of these rookies, because we don't exactly know where they're going to go yet, but we assume Reece Hall and Kenneth Walker will be the first ones off the board. So until we know where they go off the board, what's your rookie strategy? And this might be where we see our first strat of the show.
Yeah, we're going to straddle Reece Hall. Sorry, Brees. So with Hall, the way I'm looking at it is when you look at Jonathan Taylor, for example, as much as we love Reece Hall, would you agree Jonathan Taylor was a better prospect coming out? Like,
no question about it.
Over Jonathan Taylor. And Reece Hall is a good prospect, but Jonathan Taylor was on another level. He landed in a backfield that had Marlon Mack, who had done some things, but not a lot, had Naheem Hines. And guess what? His ADP basically stayed early 4th round. It eventually creeped into the late 3rd. You would see some people reach for him in the early 3rd and in occasional drafts, some in the mid 3rd, but he was a late 3rd round pick. Reece Hall has already gotten to that level. And so my thought process is, as I think through all the backfields in the league, like, how many backfields don't at least have someone like what we thought of Marlon Mack 2 years ago, where Reece Hall could just land and probably be like, wow, oh my God, he should be a 2nd round pick. I think if he landed in Buffalo, despite the fact that Devin Singletary has done better than what people believe, I think people would be so in on the Buffalo offense, that probably moves Reece Hall to a 2nd round pick. I think your team, the Eagles, if they were to take him, because of the fact that we know they're so run heavy and just Miles Sanders hasn't shown enough to this point. Like, I think people would be willing to just say, you know what, screw Miles Sanders. I don't care about Boston Scott. Kenneth Gainwell was a 5th round pick. If the Eagles were to take, Reece Hall, in the 2nd round, he probably moves into the 2nd round of fantasy drafts. Then once you get outside of that, like Atlanta would work, but Cordarrelle Patterson's going to have a role in the receiving game. So there's at least a doubt there. My guess is he's probably a 3rd round pick if he lands there.
And the team's terrible. They're never going to be in scoring position. How many carries?
Which leads to the next team, Houston. Like, Houston, yes, he would have an every down role, but who gives a shit?
Right. They're terrible. You're not winning with teams. We say that every year. Yeah, don't draft players on bad teams.
Yeah, and volume still matters. He get tons of check downs, all those sort of things. Breece Hall could still end up having value, but the potential upside, could be tougher for Hall. He's not like Christian McCaffrey put up some huge years on a bad Panthers team, but he is such a plus in the receiving game. Breece Hall's not that. He's solid, but he is not Christian McCaffrey in the receiving game. When Matt Waldman was breaking him down and basically saying, like, this guy could play receiver. Like, he could play receiver in the league. That's not what Breece Hall is. So once I think through those things, my thought is with Breece Hall, if I'm drafting today, I want exposure to Breece Hall, but only when he's at or below ADP, because there's only a few spots that he can land that I think his ADP really moves up. Now, I could be wrong. There are folks that, a lot probably consider smarter than me in the industry that think that Breece Hall will be a 2nd round pick by the time we're drafting in August. When I look at the historical data over the last several years, like, I don't see it. Even like Javonta Williams. Most people thought that Melvin Gordon was washed last year, but Javonta Williams stayed in the 5th, 6th round. He would occasionally creep into the 4th round of drafts. And so I think Breece Hall's going to go in a similar round of the NFL draft and a similar pick range to those guys in the NFL draft in a weaker draft class. So people are going to immediately discount him as a little bit. And there's just so many competitive backfields he could land in. I don't think you need to go out of your way to go nuts grabbing him. Now, if he lands in Buffalo and you want to take some swings in the 2nd round, once that happens, I think that's fine, but I don't think you need to be betting on it. There's just not enough spots for him to land that just look hyper elite, in my opinion.
I'm going to make one of my crazy predictions here because I'm drinking a 6% IPA. So let's say the Eagles draft a running back, Miles Sanders, who's only making $1.2 million this year, traded to the Bills on draft day.
That would send people nuts. Like, then people would like Miles Sanders again.
Yeah. I mean, is Miles Sanders that much better than Devin Singletary? I mean, probably, but
maybe. I don't know. Actually,
got to hang on to the damn ball.
Like, he's more athletic than Devin Singletary. He's probably he hasn't shown he's a better running back. That's for sure.
The Eagles are not picking up his 5th-year option. He's on year 4 right now. He's an undrafted free agent next year, and so he'll likely be on another team. So it is possible that the Birds could be looking for somebody, and Lord knows they have enough picks.
I know it's a side note, but the disappointing thing with Miles, man, is just never picked up the receiving down work, right? That's the pass down work was what we were looking for out of Sanders. If he could pick that up in addition, man, he just never looked right in that role. Now, some of that was on Carson Wentz, who early on looked terrible trying to throw the ball underneath, to the running backs. Like, it was brutal. And I remember you actually retweeting tweeting some of those plays. And you're like, what the hell is going on with the Eagles? With Carson Wentz trying to throw the backs. But so for Hall to ultimately live up to the hype that I think some people think in that second round, man, he's got to land on a very narrow path. Like, he's got to land with the Bills, the Eagles, one of those teams for him to really pay off on that. Otherwise, I think his ADP stays about where it's at. Maybe it moves up a little bit, but it could also move down some.
Let's talk about some running back fades. And this one might ruffle some feathers out there because I've seen this guy going off the board at 102. And it's second-year running back Javonta Williams of the Broncos. All the talent in the world. Incredible supporting cast around him now. But we know the Broncos are likely to bring in someone. That someone is probably going to be Melvin Gordon again. Williams has a current ADP of RB6 going off the board at the end of the first round, 111. So why is he a fade for you, Mr. McFarland?
Well, and if folks have been reading my stuff, this offseason,
I do have a free PFF membership.
My first pass of the ranks, like Javonta Williams was RB2, assuming
I remember that
Melvin Gordon was going to be gone, which I would still stand by. I think he needs to be in the top 3 or so if we know for sure Melvin Gordon is gone in my ranks. Now, having said that, ADP and my ranks are 2 different things, and the way fantasy players think are 2 different things. And remember, this is an ADP article. The goal of this article is to be drafting players today that we think this is probably the best ADP you're going to get on them all season. Because let's face it, if you're drafting today, this should be your strategy. You're not going to have as good of information when it gets, to people that are drafting in September. Jack Miller, Establish the Run, has done a great article on this. And there's been other people allude to this in the past. But look, the later you draft, the better. And I've talked about it for years. My teams that go the furthest, I've had a few that I've drafted early, are typically late drafted teams. And the other component is you're just you're wading into the waters where, look, there's a lot more novices drafting with you. So it means you're sitting down in a draft room with sometimes 1 or 2 other good drafters. They could be on opposite ends of you, and there's tons of value following to you. Whereas if you're drafting, now, mostly people that are, basically if you're drafting now, you're drafting with degenerates, like people that just love the game. They read this stuff every day. There's not a lot of edges you're going to scratch out, but I found that these are edges that, because just of human nature, people are late to react to certain things. So with Javonta Williams, my thought is this, Drake. Let's say Melvin Gordon doesn't sign. Let's say that the Broncos don't sign another back. How much further above round 1, pick 10 is Javonta Williams really moving? Maybe none. Maybe none. It could be 1 or 2 spots.
You don't think he'd go to like the 1-4 at that point? He'd be up there with I think he'd be in the conversation. You got JT, McCaffrey.
Going 1-4. Like when you got Jamar Chase, you got freaking Justin Jefferson, who's at a criminal discount going the end of the first round.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean 1-4. I meant like the 4th running back overall.
Yeah, he might be the 4th running back, but that's going to move him up like 2 spots in the round. So here's my point. I would rather take Javonta Williams at 1-8 in August, knowing for sure that Melvin Gordon's not re-signed and they didn't draft a running back, then take him at 110 today when both of those things could still happen. What's the point? Like, there's not a point. Like, there's no point to doing it. It's not giving you any kind of edge. So on Javonta Williams, I love him. Like, I've been pro Javonta Williams. I've been thrashed on Twitter because people said I'm too far out in front of Javonta Williams. I quoted. I mean, I tweeted out last week, not quoted. I tweeted out last week that if all running back carries were equal and everyone got, you know, every down workload, I think Javonta Williams would be in the top 3 backs. So I love the player, but strategy and loving players, there's 2 separate things. And so you have to bring them together to really formulate like how you want to optimize drafting right now. Most likely you can still draft in August, and worst cases you're going to get, you know, Javonta Williams around this ADP or maybe 1 or 2 pick higher. You know, there's just too many other guys in front of him that he's just not going to pass. He's not, especially once average players start flooding draft rooms. People are not going to take Javonta Williams over Derrick Henry. It ain't fucking happening.
I think there's not going to be a player that's more overdrafted this year than Javonta Williams. I think he will be the most hyped guy. He'll be the most overdrafted guy. And at the end of the season, if they bring back Melvin Gordon, or who knows, they could draft somebody too. You never know. They have.
But here's the thing: if Melvin gets added, I guarantee you he drops to mid-second round, late second round. So that's the beauty. If you like Javonta Williams, wait for Melvin Gordon to be added, because we've seen so many backs in their first year show the traits that Javonta has shown. And in the second year, regardless of what their backfield situation looks like, be able to overcome it. So I would rather Melvin Gordon re-sign, draft Javonta Williams at the end of the second, early third, than draft him today at 110. Like, yeah. I would still prefer that situation. So I feel like it's a win-win with Javonta. You wait, and Melvin Gordon does re-sign. You pay an extra 2 picks, but you know it's worth it. You wait, Melvin Gordon does re-sign, and you get to take him mid and second. And you're still okay with, you know, gaining exposure to him, you know, on your portfolio over the offseason.
We've got a new coach and coordinator out in Denver. We've got obviously a new quarterback in Russell Wilson. I'm not sure, and I could look totally foolish, you know, 8 months from now. I'm not sure that he, in a dual backfield, is going to deliver you first round value. I don't see it happening. Why would it? This is a guy who's not that big of an asset in the passing game. I don't see Russell Wilson as a guy who's, with all those wide receivers and tight ends out there, who's looking to check it down, got all this big money. He wants to put the ball in the end zone, throw it down the field. They're going to find him, let him throw. He's not looking to check down to Javonta Williams and hand the ball off. So I don't know. I think drafters beware of Javonta if Melvin comes back. Melvin Gordon doesn't suck. I know a lot of people like to say,
I think what you have to consider, though, is the fact that what Javonta's probably going to, and I think you're right. When you have Cortland Sutton, when you have Jerry Jeudy, when you have KJ Hamler, when you have, Tim Patrick, you have Albert O, like Okwabunam, like there's so many. You
4 beers deep saying that.
Yeah, I thought about it first for a second, but I didn't want to have a microaggression towards Albert Okwabunam. I got to learn. I need to be able to pronounce his name. So anyway, yeah, there's plenty of weapons. So why would you check it down? And Russ Wilson wants to go deep. So I think what you're saying is completely valid. But I also think that Russell Wilson is the tide that, really rises, brings all the ships up. And Javonta Williams could have a 15 touchdown game, season. He could have a 16, 17 touchdown season. So that's the trade-off that you're getting with, the improved quarterback play versus you might lose a few percentage-wise targets to backs. And so I think that's fair from your perspective. And I think there's definitely enough flags with Javonta that, man, you really got to see the bull upside case, which I do think is there. I think he could be a top 3 back. But I think the red flags you're raising are definitely, I think they're warranted. Because look, the thing is, you got to take him over Stephon Diggs. You got to take him over Tyreek Hill. You got to take him over. Dalvin Cook's not a great example because, we got the lawsuit, still pending. So there's risk with him. But there's just Mixon, a lot of players Swift, that which I would take him over Mixon. Mixon, I've seen enough. You're not getting the passing rule, dude. I like your offense, but with Williams, I think you could be in an equally good offense now with Russ. And I still like your passing upside. And I think you're a young, explosive player. So that would be one where I would probably swing to Javonta. You don't have to do it right now. There's no point in drafting Javonta right now, unless you're just trying to create a certain roster where you want Williams on it and some of these other guys that you can be drafting below ADP today. That would be the reason, for doing it.
Let's switch gears a little bit to wide receiver and talk about a couple of players you might want to target. Obviously, we know early in the draft, You're targeting wide receiver. A lot of those guys are great. So, that's just, it is what it is. All those guys in the first 2-3 rounds are really good.
Badasses, so just take them.
Yeah. So you, in your article, though, mentioned a lot of very, very young wide receivers, some of which being rookies. We don't even know we're on teams yet. So talk a little bit about these wide receivers and why you're so bullish on nabbing them.
Well, I mean, again, it's just about ADP. So when we look at the team visits, we look at the time they've spent with them at the combine. Then are they having them in for a top 30 visit? Did they go to their pro day? All those sort of things. And again, it's not just specifically about the players. It's more about teams and saying, wow, they visited with 6 wide receivers. That's what starts to give you a hint. Like, okay, and teams are going to look at players they think are going to be available around their pick. So that definitely has something to do with the players that they're looking at. But the biggest thing for me, Drake, is knowing that at the end of the first round, the Kansas City Chiefs have 2 picks. The Green Bay Packers have 2 picks. They both just traded away alpha receivers, and they have elite quarterbacks. To me, the backstop, people are talking, man, Treylon Burks is going to fall the first round. Man, what happens if Treylon Burks falls to Kansas City or Green Bay? Like, he's not getting through those 4 picks. Like, he's going off the board. And guess what? He becomes immediately the number 1 wide receiver. He's already wide receiver 1 on a lot of people's boards anyway. But if he landed in one of those 2 situations, oh my God. And so to me, that's the backstop for all these guys we like in the first round. If any one of them go late, so what? They probably land with Green Bay or Kansas City. I mean, there's a good chance of that. So I really like the first round, graded receivers. Not as excited about the guys that'll be going in the second. Still like them. But I think really when you look at Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Treylon Burks, you look at Jameson Williams even, who's really, he's doing good so far, coming off the ACL. You look at Chris Olave, like those guys, specifically them. Like, we could have other receivers sneak into the first, like the teams fall in love with if those are all gone. But man, to me, I feel like those guys are either going to go high in the draft. So think about it. If Drake London goes, in the top 5 picks, or Garrett Wilson goes in the top 5 picks, like his ADP is going to move up. Because guess what? Number one, like we saw people underreact to Jalen Waddle last year, and they're gonna be like, "Whoa, Jalen Waddle shouldn't have been a 9th round pick last year. He was taken in the top 10 selections of last year's draft." So we know that most likely these guys are all going to increase in ADP, and that's the biggest takeaway. Like, buy them now because they're going in the first round, and if they slide to the end, they're going to the Chiefs or the Packers, and they're going to cost more by the time you're ready to draft in August. So those are the kind of players we want to get. It doesn't mean we stop drafting them in August. It just means that, wow, like to add to our portfolio, right now you're having drafts where you're getting Treylon Burks in the 8th, 9th, 10th round, and then he's going in the 5th or 6th round, by the time we get to August. Like, those are positive things for you.
It's funny when you look at the total guarantees for wide receivers right now, and the top 5 wide receivers in terms of guaranteed money, 60 million is the lowest of all of those. Tyreek Hill has 72 million. Steph Diggs, as of today, 70 million. I mean, look at how much money is going to the wide receiver. It is a passing league, folks. And if you look at this NFL draft board Dwain just alluded to, and you think, which teams need wide receivers? I mean, I'm just starting in the middle of the draft, right? And you said there's 5 or 6 round 1 possible wide receivers. Every draft, or every time I see people on Twitter like, you can wait, get a receiver in the 2nd round. Okay, so the Eagles need a receiver. They're at 15. The Saints are at 16. All right, then the Eagles and Saints pick again at 18, 19. The Patriots at 21 need somebody. Green Bay at 22 needs someone. Dallas at 24 needs somebody. Buffalo at 25. Green Bay, Kansas City, and Detroit to round out the round. All those people need wide receivers because they know if they wait till round 2, guess who's sitting there? Jacksonville, their receivers suck. Detroit, they suck. Giants, Jets, Texans, Jets again, Bears at 39. There's going to be a million receivers gone 40 picks into this draft.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm bullish on all of these guys, especially the ones we think will go in the first round. I'm not quite as bullish on the ones that we think will go in the 2nd round because some of the landing spots that you talked about at the top of that, but still, like, I like those players. I want exposure to them. But the bottom line is, like, when these guys go in the top, 40 picks, a lot of them are going to move up in ADP. Or at worst, they're going to stay where they are. So, like, I want to go ahead and get exposure to them now while I'm drafting.
Javonta Williams, not Javonta Williams, as I flipped to the wrong screen
Jameson?
here. Rondell Moore. Yeah,
That's not even close, Drake.
not even close. Looking at the complete,
I was trying to help you out. I'm like, Jameson Williams?
700 different tabs open right here.
I got you,
so Rondell Moore is a guy that you're looking to target here. Boy, we were high on him last year, and he came out in camp and he was looking great, and just, things just didn't click every week with the Jets because, well, they're the Jets. But
you're about Elijah Moore or Rondell now?
We're talking, excuse me, Elijah Moore's with the Jets. Rondell Moore is with Cliff Kingsbury out in Arizona.
Yeah. Yep.
So Rondell Moore, let's go there. You've got AJ Green. He's gone. Christian Kirk got a monster contract. God only knows why in Jacksonville. So now Rondell Moore is hanging out with an aging, we'll say, DeAndre Hopkins. So there is a real opportunity for Rondell Moore, speaking of a team that could draft a wide receiver, for Rondell Moore to ascend in this offense and become an every down player. And he's being drafted at wide receiver 46.
Yeah. So first of all, again, zoom out, macro. One of the positions, and you and I have talked about this on previous pods, that we see really move up in ADP as the offseason goes on are second-year players, specifically wide receivers. So rookies are number one. Number two are free agents signing in new places. And then number three, tied with number two, actually, are your second-year players. And then you have third-year players that fall off a little bit behind that. So you want to get exposure to these younger guys early in draft season because we've seen historically that they warm up. People warm to them. And think it makes sense, right? As people come in and they start reading all this content, everybody's getting all their projections out, all this stuff, and we have all this time to think about it. Like we find more and more reasons to move these young players up because they think we think they may break out, all these sort of things. So draft them now. And Rondell Moore specifically, I highlight because of some of the things you just said. Number one, you got AJ Green gone. Number two, Christian Kirk is gone. Cliff Kingsbury's already said, he's like, look, we're expanding this guy's role. I mean, could that just be coach speak? Yeah. But even if it's not accurate, at the end of the day, what I know about Rondell Moore is between projection season, when everybody looks at the Cardinals roster and all of the experts put out what they think, these, players are going to do, like Rondell Moore is going to have a good projection because there's nobody left on the Cardinals. We'll see what they do in the draft. But even if that occurs, it sounds like he's going to have the slot role, so Antoine Wesley, AJ Green, they're gone on the outside. They could add someone else and we could still look at it and be like, well, wow, Rondell Moore could be the number one in this offense, but at a minimum, he's probably the number three behind Hopkins and Hertz, and people's imaginations will start to take them away. So you want to get your exposure to Rondell Moore now because he has so many outs that could move him up in ADP. Like, period, second-year players, you want to draft them now, but Rondell Moore specifically, there are so many ways that we can see his ADP increase. We just need Kingsbury to untether him from the line of scrimmage. But that's another thing, Drake. Like with Chase Edmonds gone, depending on what the Cardinals do in the draft, like we could see Rondell Moore used out of the backfield more, right? We could see him catching some of those passes that Chase Edmonds did. So there's just so many paths to even not reality, narratives that people will talk about with Rondell Moore that he's going to move up in ADP. Like my guess is by the time we're drafting, assuming they don't spend a first-round pick on a receiver, I'm guessing 7th round. You can get him in the 10th round right now. Like you should be drafting him right now because the thing I do when I look at these tiers, Drake, and I look at these players, the other thing is which one of these things looks like the other, but the others are all going before. Like Rondell Moore, is going to be a player that's going to fit that, kind of criteria. So he's a guy that I definitely think you should be getting your fill of as much as you can because once he becomes a 6th or 7th round pick and now opportunity costs, there's guys that you're trading out. Mm-hmm. And at that point, it'd be great to know that, wow, I've already got Rondell Moore on 30% of my teams. He didn't cost me anything. And I can just kind of lay off and I can refocus on someone else. So that's the way I think with Rondell Moore, we should proceed through the offseason.
You know who you just talked me into is Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz, I think, is going to be really underrated.
Yeah. Nobody's going to want him. He's old, but he's going to be the 2nd or 3rd target on the offense, most likely. And look, we've seen older tight ends perform. So Zach Ertz is a great – Ian talked about it today on our pod where we were drafting. He said, hey, Zach Ertz is kind of my line in the sand. Like he's my absolute backstop and I thought Ian quoted it perfectly. Like Ertz really should be like your last guy standing. Like once it gets to him, you're like, I'm going to go ahead and take Zach Ertz if you don't have a tight end already.
Yeah. I'm looking at your tight end tiers over at pff.com right now. And there's obviously the 1A tier of Kelsey, Andrews, Pitts, but down in 1C, there's little Zach Ertz. He's in your third tier of tight ends with Hawkins.
Still in Goddard. He's still in my tier 1. So
yeah.
that 1C, the 1 in front of it means he's still a top 12, and my tiers don't always add up to 12 or whatever. But it really adds up to what I think the criteria are. And so some season, and that's again why, like, tomorrow, my article will be about engineering backward, thinking through a draft backward to the beginning and how you think about structuring rosters for the season. And it'll change after the draft, but just kind of a high level piece, looking at the players of how you could build out a roster. Zach Ertz will definitely be a part of that, because every year, just because they're, the top 12 receivers don't mean they're really going to perform like the top 12. The top 24 doesn't mean that we think they're going to meet the criteria to be what we historically think of as being a top 24 receiver. So those are just the things that you have to think through.
I mentioned him as I was tongue-tied earlier on, but Elijah Moore for the New York Jets is a player that you say you want exposure to in 2022.
Is that I'm also so Reece Hall, you're not the only person I'm straddling. I'm also straddling Elijah Moore. How uncomfortable does that make you, Drake?
A couple more beers, it's 2022. We're loose. We things can go either way here. I live in New York. We're very liberal here. And Amon-Ra St. Brown. So they're both in this kind of straddle tier here. And St. Brown's a guy I'd love to talk about. Everybody in America is like, pass on Amon-Ra St. Brown, biggest fade in fantasy. Why? He's talented. He's got a great pedigree, came from a big time college program where he was productive. Like, maybe he's got a weird name and he wasn't drafted in the first round. He's a really good, talented player, and they don't have anybody else. It's him and Hawkinson. That's it.
Yeah. So for these two players, again, like, if you've listened to me all offseason, I love Elijah Moore and I love Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I can give you different advice about if you're drafting today. These are players that you should take at ADP or below, because guess what? Most likely their ADP is going to go down. The Jets have been connected to every receiver out there, and we've even had Daniel Jeremiah, who we know knows Joe Douglas. I mean, some of these guys have stronger connections to certain organizations. Like, there's a really good chance that the Jets take a receiver in the first round. It's not a for sure thing, but if that happens, guess what's happening? Elijah Moore's ADP is going to fall. And we still love Elijah Moore because he checked a lot of boxes pre-draft and then in his rookie season. So in a year 2 model, Elijah Moore projects as a good receiver. I don't care if they draft Drake London or not. I still think Elijah Moore is a good receiver, and he should still be going right around the top 24. And so guess what's going to happen? He's going to fall out of the top 24 if they draft Drake London, and then you can still draft Elijah Moore 2 rounds later. Worst case, they don't draft Drake London, and guess what? Elijah Moore's ADP is probably not going to move. You could say the same thing for Amon-Ra St. Brown. The trick with the Jets and the Lions, and why I included these 2 receivers specifically, is because both teams have multiple picks, in the top 35. So the Jets obviously have 2 really early first-round picks, got 2 second-round picks. If you look at the Lions, they've got kind of the bookends to the first round, and then they turn around and pick right away in the second round. So these are teams that, they've got plenty of ammo to throw out receiver. Receiver, is something. And when you look at the Jets, they were in on Tyreek Hill. They just missed out. So we know that they're probably not satisfied right now with Corey Davis. We know they brought back Braxton Berrios. They've added a couple of tight ends. Elijah Moore still probably firmly in their plans as wide receiver 1 right now, but they're looking for someone else to really work with him. And so that's the way I think about it. These are players that I love, but just because they draft someone, it's not going to necessarily push me off of them, because I think that they're really good players. If you guys want to go back and check out, some research that I did based on Jacob Sanderson and some stuff that he had found, and I went and actually I think his came from Fantasy Bean Counter, and so there's kind of a trail there, but I went back and really just studied PFF receiving grades and receivers that have posted at least a 75 grade or better in their rookie season all the way back to 2011. And wow, is it an ever impressive list. And it identified guys before they ever broke out, like Chris Godwin, Hunter Renfrow, even Doug Baldwin back in the day. And guess who? Players that are on this list. Amon-Ra St. Brown is at the top of the list. He's the cover of the article. And then Elijah Moore just barely missed that cut, so you don't want to be hyper technical. Elijah Moore did a lot of great things. So 2 receivers we still are going to love no matter who they take in the draft. Does it maybe cap their upside a little bit? Maybe. But still, there's still players I want exposure to. But worst case, Worst case, like you at least know that they've added another receiver and you don't have to pay the pick you're paying today. That's the big takeaway on these straddles.
Amon-Ra St. Brown finished the year. Nobody was hotter. 6 straight weeks of double-digit targets.
Just nuts.
Scored a touchdown in all but 1 week from week 13 on.
And you got to be pretty damn good to do that, because guess what? Defensive coordinators start seeing that film. You're on film 3 weeks in a row. They're like, okay, who is this dude? We got to take him away. TJ Hawkinson's not in there. DeAndre Swift's not in there. Let's take this guy away. Guess what they couldn't do? They couldn't take him away.
Sure.
And you could argue, say, well, he's a slot receiver. Yeah, he gets to play outside and in the slot, but so what? That's not his fault. Like, he gets good matchups. How's that a bad thing against Amon-Ra St. Brown? Like, that's a positive.
And he played against a couple of good corners too. You know, he played the Vikings. He played against Denver. Denver is an excellent secondary and corners. He lit them up, 12 for 73 or 8 for 73 on 12 targets. So anyway, we don't have to break down last year. You guys know Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's good. How about some wide receivers that we're going to be fading as we go into 2022 drafts at current ADP? A couple of guys here that have been in the news lately. Juju Smith-Schuster, he's a wide receiver 29 right now because he's on the Chiefs, and he's kind of the only game in town with no Tyreek. And also then Gabe Davis coming off a scorching hot playoff run where he's now the wide receiver 2 in Buffalo. So let's talk about these two guys.
Yeah, and Alan Lazard would have made this list, but his ADP was cheap enough that I was like, it's fine. You want to be taking some Alan Lazard, probably better to wait because you're going to get him cheaper once the Packers take a receiver in the first round. But yeah, specifically with these two, look, Juju has been on just a decline, since his breakout season in 2018. Just yards per route run, targets per route run, PFF receiving grade, like these things are all like just lackluster. Nobody wanted to pay Juju Smith-Schuster. That's 2 off seasons in a row. Last year he had to sign, the franchise tag with the Steelers. This year, really the Chiefs gave him an incentive-laden deal. MVS got a better deal than Juju Smith-Schuster. So this is a situation where I look at it and I'm like, yeah, right now, like if the Chiefs don't take a receiver in the first round or make a move and somehow get one in the second round, Juju will probably be worth his ADP at this pick. But here's my point, Drake. Like if the Chiefs don't take a receiver in the first round, like Juju Smith-Schuster's ADP is not going anywhere. It's going to be a 6th-round pick. People are going to look at him and they're like, well, he's kind of washed, but he plays with Mahomes, fine. Wide receiver 3, we'll take him in the 6th round. Maybe eventually he pokes his head into the 5th round of ADPs, but I don't think people are going to get like hyper excited around Juju Smith-Schuster. We never know all the narratives that will fully take hold in fantasy land. Sometimes they're just completely crazy, but overall, usually like we can get a pretty good gauge on these things. I think Smith-Schuster right now is priced as high as he can be. And what's going to happen? So even if you are a Juju Smith-Schuster lover and you're like, look, man, look what he did as a young player. Like you can't write him off. Great. Okay. But why take him right now? Wait, when they draft, a receiver with one of those 2 picks at the end of the first round, guess what's happening to Juju Smith-Schuster's ADP? It's going down. So right now you're buying him probably at near peak ADP. So why do that? Just wait. So if you're a truther of Juju, great. Wait, pick him in the 8th or 9th round once they draft a receiver. Let's say they don't draft one. Oh, well, you didn't miss out on anything. You're going to get him around the same ADP then. So, like, he's just a player, and it extends to Gabe Davis as well. Like, we like Gabe Davis. Definitely showed flashes. Won people a lot of freaking money if you were playing DFS, down the stretch, or you were playing in a playoff-type format, which I had a few teams that, like, my quarterback was dead, and Gabe Davis was the player I had on these playoff challenges from the Bills. And, like, he was enough to get me in the money because he had these huge weeks. But at the end of the day, like we gave Davis, there's not a lot of draft capital. If they draft a receiver in the first round, his ADP is going to go down. And the Bills have visited with multiple receivers that are projected to go in the first round. So for me, again, it's not about hating on Gabe Davis. It's not about hating on Juju Smith-Schuster. Right now is just not the optimal time for them with ADP, because if everything goes right, most likely their price remains the same. If things go wrong, it's going to go down. And so then it's your choice. If you still want exposure to the players, great. You get it at a lesser price. But if all of a sudden you're like, I don't like Gabe Davis now that the Bills took, Chris Olave. I don't really think he's going to be that great because Olave is going to play out on the outside. We know they got Crowder and McKenzie on the inside, so he's probably only on the field in 10 personnel again. Guess what happens? Gabe Davis is now a round 15 pick, and you've been drafting him so far, like in the 70s. Like it's just, and I like him, but it's just not the time to draft him.
Yeah, talking about Kansas City and their draft, they have 3 of the top 50 picks, 4 of the top 62. So 4 picks in the first 2 rounds for the Kansas City Chiefs. So they obviously will be busy on draft night. Dwain, I'm going to make people go over to pff.com if they want to find out about your quarterbacks to target, to straddle, and to fade. Make sure if you need a promo code, it's HUSTLE. You know, that's what our promo code is for everything. And it might be the same for a few best ball endeavors we have coming up. Wink, wink. So just get ready for that. So yeah, go over to pff.com. Check out Dwain's article if you want to hear about his quarterbacks. Question here in the chat room. Always appreciate our friends joining us on YouTube. Please make sure you're going to YouTube and searching and subscribing to the Fantasy Football Hustle. Ryan asks, Dwain, is Michael Thomas being slept on this year?
Yeah, I think Michael Thomas is a fascinating player because we haven't seen him in a year and a half, Drake, and he no longer has Drew Brees that he's returning to. Taysom Hill's not even the quarterback. Who's really the last player we saw him with. Now, what I will say with Thomas, despite the fact that he's heading into his age 30 season and he's had injuries, you know, he's a player that really honestly operates more like a tight end. So he's going to play motion down inside, works against linebackers, safeties a lot, which gives him an advantage because then, like, if you're a savvy route runner, you know how things work. I think those are roles where you, even though he takes a physical pounding at times, like he can still get the separation, do all the things you need. The thing you worry about, like, is Drew Brees on those underneath and short passes just so pinpoint accurate, you know, to open up rack and other things, or yak, if you want to call it, yards after the catch. Where I just with Jameis right now, or if they, you know, they're being connected to some of these rookies, they just made, you know, the trade, you know, with the Eagles for a draft pick. Like, those things are enough that kind of keep me from getting too high on Michael Thomas. So Thomas is a player that when I'm drafting, when he falls past ADP, he's kind of, you know, he's a straddle in a different way for different reasons than the guys we just talked about. I don't want to draft him above ADP. I'm probably not going to draft him much at ADP because there's several other players I like right around him that I think give me a similar range of outcomes. And so with him, whenever he slips past, I want to go ahead and gain exposure because I do acknowledge the upside. You know, we've seen Jameis support, you know, multiple fantasy weapons before. But we do have a defensive-minded head coach. I think they're going to try to make it drive the bus, Jameis. If it's a rookie, it's probably going to be the same thing. Hey, let's just drive the bus, try to win with some defense. So I don't think we'll see the volume that we saw in the past, you know, with the Saints. But I acknowledge, like, we could still see a 150 target season out of Michael Thomas. Won't be the quality we saw with Drew Brees. But I mean, like, he could still, Drake, he could come up with a 90 reception season. Like, it's possible. So I don't want to totally write him off, but I'm just being careful in my approach.
Michael Thomas's ADP over at the FFPC, wide receiver 23. He is on average at pick 5'11". So you're getting him right there on that 5'6" turn. A couple of guys going after him I think I have more interest in. Big Mike Williams of the Chargers, Allen Robinson of the now Los Angeles Rams, Cortland Sutton, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Michael Pittman, who I'm very high on this year, who actually has a legit quarterback who's going off in the middle of the 6th. So plenty of time to talk about those guys as the season rolls on. But I think this was a fun one, Dwain, just to kind of talk through a little bit of the dead zone, a little bit of players to target, and kind of starting to build that draft strategy as we head into the spring and summer months. And we're going to be drafting a lot here on the Hustle. I have an idea over the next few months, but this was a fun trip into the mind of Mr. McFarland.
Well, I appreciate it, man. Like, I love it. Like, this, you know me, like, these are my favorite topics. Like, I love talking about the players. Like, I can go on and on, you know, utilization, their efficiency, and those are all important things. But like, once it all comes together and you get to start thinking about the strategy, like, to me, that's the stuff that like really gets my juices flowing, because it's really, how does it all come together and how do we try to win? Like, we all want to win at the end of the day. You know, we're all trying to figure out how to beat one another. And so when we can come together, talk through these things, like, I'm always excited.
To me, the most boring day in fantasy football is the day after your draft when the rosters are all set and you're like, oh, well, these are my guys. I guess I can't worry about everybody else now that I talked about for 8 months. But Well, folks, we appreciate it. Make sure you're following the show on Twitter at FF Hustle. Dwain is, of course, at Dwain McFarland. I'm at Drake Fantasy. Find us on TikTok at FF Hustle, at Hate the Drake. I'm probably going to change that, but it's what it is right now. And Dwain is at Dwain underscore McFarland.
It's Dwain Straddle. No.
The Texas Straddler, Dwain McFarland. There's your new nickname.
Oh, my God, the Texas Straddler. There we go.
And if you want to play poker against Dwain, go over to the Fantasy Football Expo in August. You can play poker against Dwain. You can play flag football against me.
For a good cause.
Yeah, Dwain and I will be hanging out. We'll be roommates at the expo out that way. So
yeah, I've been running every day, Drake. My wife says I've been snoring some. I'm like, man, I can't be snoring on Drake like the first time we meet. You know?
Dude, we will be so blackout drunk. It will not matter. Like, or in a hospital after I blow out my ACL playing on the turf fields at the Hall of Fame.
Again, like I said, I'll have the bruised ego. I'll be knocked out of the poker tournament. You know, you're going to have the pulled quad, but we'll be hanging.
Yeah, absolutely, folks. And you're going to be hanging with us all throughout draft season. Remember to stick and stay here. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review over on iTunes. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us today. And remember to never get out hustled. We'll see you next time, folks.